the 89th version of Tequila Tuesday. Rocking and rolling, going strong. This will be the last one that I'm at for a couple weeks. I'm actually leaving in the morning, headed to Europe for a month. So Ryan has some plans to host a couple sessions. So I'm glad I could squeeze this one in before I get on out of here. So really excited for this conversation today with the community. We've got one of the most knowledgeable people in all of AI here to share some insights and wisdom with the group. Hopefully it'll be a really good discussion. I'm going to ask a whole bunch of questions of our esteemed guests, but I also want everybody, as usual, to raise your hand, be active in the chat. We'll get you off mute so you can interact and ask some questions as well. And we're talking about AI in sales and why you should embrace it and not fear it. And we're here with Sri, who's one of the co-founders of Regie.ai. How's it going, Sri? Welcome back. Actually, we talked maybe a year and a half ago or so. So it's good to have you on the show again.
Of course, glad to be back. I actually just came back from Europe, by the way.
You did?
Yeah.
Where were you?
I was in Mallorca.
Oh wow! How about that? No, that's not where I'm going, but I have a feeling that might be a little bit better spot than where I'm going with my son to play soccer in Swansea in Wales for a little bit. And then I'll be in London for a few days as well. But I'm jealous that you were in Mallorca. So welcome back. And thanks for spending some time with us. Real quick, in case anybody doesn't know, tell everybody a little bit about Regie.ai and what y'all do and who it's for.
Yeah. So my background, just to quickly go through, I'm an engineer by training, so might be a very different background than most of the people here, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but at least happy to help you answer any sorts of engineering questions or technology questions and so on. I did a PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon in AI, and then I was part of the early team at Facebook, the first 100 engineers of Facebook, then 2 AI startups, later started Regie. Thanks to Matt Millen, my co-founder. Regie basically brings all the power of generative AI into sales. So we started back in 2020 when GPT-3 came out, and I'm happy to talk through the history of generative AI and all of that kind of stuff. And then when Matt came on as well, we thought through all the applications of generative AI into sales. And in the last year, generative AI itself has evolved. And so we are evolving with it. And it's been a wild ride. And I think it's just tip of the iceberg. I think it's the ride over the next couple of years is going to be even crazier, I think.
Yeah. It feels a little bit like an overnight sensation, maybe for some of us who have not been in this space for very long. Can you talk a little bit about where the tech actually came from? The origins of AI, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So this might be a little long, but hopefully this is useful. Back in the 70s and 80s is when we had the first starts at AI. So AI at the time referred to basically canonical problems of AI used to be things like image recognition, speech recognition, natural language processing. Those were, I would say, the 3 biggest problems in AI. So if you were working on AI, you were working on one of those things. And if you were working on one of those things, you were working on AI. And one of the main techniques that was used at the time was this thing called neural networks, which very, in a rudimentary manner, mimicked how a human brain worked. So we use that to do image recognition, natural language processing, so taking large pieces of text and trying to understand it, and also speech recognition. So somebody speaks something, and then you can translate that to text. But to be honest, it wasn't really all that practical for the next 20 odd years. And as someone pointed out, 10 years in the making, 2012 is when we had the first big sort of breakthrough. And the reason for that is, when we were doing AI before, when we were doing things like image recognition, facial recognition, as an example, we used to do a lot of processing of images before we even let the AI do anything with it. So for example, if you took an image, we would do a lot of work to figure out what's the foreground of the image, background of the image, do a lot of image segmentation to find boundaries. If you're doing facial recognition, try to find eyes and nose and all of that stuff before you even try to match it to someone. There's lots of work, lots of hacks. And what Google showed in 2012 is that just by giving just raw pixels to neural networks and lots of compute power and lots of data, it could just identify cats in YouTube videos without doing any of these hacks. So that was a pretty big breakthrough.
I love that cats was the first breakthrough.
Cats were the first breakthrough. So it's literally raw pixels. So just gave it pixels, no processing, nothing. Gave it a whole bunch of label data of which are the videos on YouTube that had cats, and then gave it a new video and tried to ask it if there was a cat on it. And then after that, Google then took the same idea, bought a company called DeepMind, used the exact same idea, exact same type of approach to play Go, which was unsolved until then for computers, beat all the top Go players. Now we're at 20, from 2012, I would say we're probably at 2014, 2015. And then took exact same piece of technology, applied it to text, and showed that you could produce decent looking text. And this was a paper that they wrote called BERT. This was now, we're probably talking 2016. And at the time, OpenAI, set up as a non-profit organization, Elon Musk and Khosla and others put in money into it to basically make sure that Google doesn't run away with this piece of technology and that it's open source and it's available for everybody to use. So it was a non-profit. And so they took the exact same approach, lots of data, lots of compute power, and just text, and to try to generate text out of it. So then they matched Google's open source models called GPT-2 at the time. And then in 2020, they came out with GPT-3 in private beta. And when GPT-3 came out, it was better than anything that existed, including Google. So they had already gotten to a better performance than Google did. And so they did what everybody does, which is they no longer open sourced it, converted into a for-profit organization. And instead of Google running away with the technology, OpenAI started.
They ran away with it. Yeah. And then they went and tried to put regulations around it, right? Yeah.
So that's what happened with GPT-3. And then that was 2020. So not open source anymore, but they gave the API access to everybody. And then 2021, GPT-3 became public beta. So everybody could get access to it if they wanted. And then 2022, of course, we had ChatGPT come out. And then 2023, we had GPT-4 come out. So that's, and then of course, by the time ChatGPT came out, which was end of last year, everybody took notice of it. And then Microsoft and Google and Amazon are all trying to catch up now.
So how can you describe the difference between like general use cases and professional use cases?
Yeah, great question. So the way I think of it is, there are a few different buckets of how these generative AI tools can be categorized. So first is the fundamental technology itself. And these are called foundational models. And there are, OpenAI is a foundational model. And ChatGPT is a foundational model because they control the technology, they control the underlying trained models and so on. And that's all general purpose, but there are a few now competing companies, both startups and larger companies. So startups like Anthropic, Stability, Cohere are all competing against OpenAI, as well as Google and Facebook and NVIDIA and others as well. So that's one layer. So these are called foundational models. And then there are the horizontal players, which used to be companies like Jasper, Copy.ai. You could take any text, write a lot of content. And then there are the vertical guys, folks like us. So we're looking very specifically at prospecting use case, very specific to sales. That will be companies that would build things very specific to legal, HR, customer success, customer support. Each one of those will have its own versions of it. And then, of course, there are the incumbents, right? So for us, that would be a Salesforce or an Outreach or a Salesloft. And in the legal, that would be like LexisNexis and Zendesk for customer support, and so on. So that's how I would distinguish the four different buckets. So you have the foundational models like ChatGPT, you have the horizontal players like Jasper Copy, you have the vertical players like us, and then you have the sort of channels, if you will, or platforms.
So how can you make all of us sound human, sound more human, and have this like sales slant, if you will, where it's not just facts, it's like fact with a story?
Yeah, great question. So right now, the way the technology is it does produce a lot of generic content. And so everybody is trying to figure out how to make it specific to the company and then specific to the individual. So both of those specializations are happening. So for example, specific to the company would be, okay, in our case, as an example, let me give you a concrete example. So we would say, okay, let's look at who you're trying to prospect to. So let's segment the list of personas you're trying to target. For each persona that you're trying to target, let's try to figure out what are the pain points and value propositions you may have for that persona. And then you may want to say, okay, what are the collateral pieces of content that I have for each one of those things? So it could be case studies, testimonials, and all of that. So you would feed that into the AI so that it would produce content that's unique to that persona, pain point, and value proposition. So that's one way to achieve it. But if you don't use something like that and you do something like ChatGPT, then it tends to be much more generic.
Yeah.
And then the race is on to try to make it very unique to yourself. And I think there's still some work to be done there.
I think that's where some of us, I'll speak for myself maybe, some of us get maybe hung up. It's like, how accurate is this stuff? Mm-hmm. I read something, this doesn't sound like me, or how my version of a human might write it. And therefore, how much work is it actually saving me on my end? Because I'm still going to have to go in and rewrite or edit it or this type of stuff. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what should our expectation be right now? And then maybe, I don't know, 6 months, a year from now, in terms of the accuracy and like how much managing of the AI, if you will, do we have to do before we can just trust it?
Yeah, great question. So there are a few problems with generative AI today. Accuracy is definitely a problem, and it's a very well-known problem. So it makes up stuff all the time. So that is one big issue right now, to make sure that it doesn't make random things up, because it's just trying to thread sentences together at the end of the day, and it just makes stuff up. The other problem that is common is it doesn't have recent content, which is very well known. And so that's obviously another problem. So what I think will happen more and more is that you will look at specialized use cases. So for example, for us, let's say it's a very specific, narrow use case, right? Which is sales prospecting emails, and so on. It is not objection handling. It's not replying to emails. It's not doing a chat. It's not doing anything fancy. So the more narrower the use case is, I think the more confident you can get and make that actually work really well. Test it across hundreds of emails, make sure that you like it, make sure it sounds authentic, make sure it doesn't make stuff up. And then you're good to go. But the more generic it gets, I think the harder it is right now for it to be trustworthy.
Okay.
So I think the specific use cases will get solved pretty quickly.
Define pretty quickly for me. It's a forecast, Sri. This is like you ask salespeople to forecast all the time. I'm asking you to forecast. Define fairly quickly.
No, like for sales prospecting, we're talking right now. So sales prospecting is one of the first few things that will happen. Same as with blogs, right? And ads copy on the marketing side. So I think those will happen pretty quickly. From there, things like landing page optimization, those things will happen pretty quickly too. I think the ones that will be harder are the ones, weirdly enough, that Microsoft and others are tackling, which I actually think will take longer, which is good that they are working on it, which would be the automatic email reply generation and objection handling and all of that stuff, because the amount of context that's needed to make that work is very high. Whereas the amount of context that's needed to write a prospecting email is very low. So I think prospecting emails is now.
Would you lump like chat bots into that, or even potentially like SMS auto reply stuff into that as well?
I think replies is harder, because the problem with replies is not just the context in the email, but it's also context outside of the email that you need to really understand. But I think, again, for simpler stuff, like the common questions and so on, I think will happen. But if somebody asks a nuanced question, I think it's going to be much harder to actually try to get that to work.
Okay. So right now, today, then, this will be my last question. I'll pause for a minute, and then we'll take a couple questions from the group. What is like my best practice? What should I be doing right now to use AI? Simple, low lift, maybe non-scary kind of stuff for people who are maybe not early adopters. Could be, maybe give me an example or two from a professional setting as a business owner or salesperson, and maybe just in my everyday personal life.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me give you an example of Regie, and I'll give you an example that's not Regie, and that might relate to personal life as well. So, but for either case, the way I would approach it is the following. I wouldn't try to use something like a chat GPT in an ad hoc basis to try to get everybody to do something with it and try to get some productivity out of it, because I think it needs to be a little bit more structured than that. So the first thing is, I would say, just making sure that humans are on both sides of the loop right now. So the first is, what are you trying to generate and what are the guardrails around it? So in Reggie's case, that would be, what are the personas you're targeting? What's the pain points that you're trying to solve for each of those personas? What are the value propositions? So that's all human driven. You know the business best, you know the pain points best, you know the value propositions best. You should make sure that you write them all down very clearly. Then if you wanted to write like 100 different emails based off of that, so that each email is slightly different, I think generative AI is more than capable of writing that. Then if you wanted to take a look at it before you sent it, I think that's even better, right? So I think that's the way I would look at it. So you would say, okay, I'm starting from the top, identifying what I want to do, use the AI to generate scale, which would be writing a lot of emails, and then double check it before I actually send. Now, if you go to a different use case, this could be personal or professional. Same thing applies. So like, let's say that I'm trying to do a marketing blog a week, or maybe 4 marketing blogs a week. You don't obviously want it to write random stuff. So you need to decide, what are the topics that I want to write about? What's the structure for each one of those topics? And what are the keywords that I'm trying to optimize for, as an example? And then you would go use the AI to write at scale, and with a click of a button, rewrite it if you don't actually like it, right? It's so much faster to do that with the AI. And then, of course, you want to proofread it and make sure that it sounds right and it didn't make stuff up and so on. So that's the way I would approach it, which is to say, take a workflow, start with the human inputs, use the AI for scale, double check your work, and that way you can get a lot of productivity. But if you said, hey, let me go see if I can use ChatGPT for some random pieces of things, then I think it'll be much harder than actually looking at very specific workflows.
That's super helpful. The next question is going to come from Evan, and it's super relevant for the topic, which is why we should embrace it instead of fear it. Because Evan has a question about ethics in AI. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, so I personally am really fascinated by all machine learning algorithms that have been developed in the last decade or so, and there's been a great deal of talk, especially at some of these larger companies, Google in particular, and several AI ethicists who quit after writing a paper called "On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots," which I'm fairly certain you're very familiar with. I was curious, since sales is often one of those areas in which there's a bifurcation between people who are extremely principled and focused on being ethical in their behavior because they find that it creates long-term results, versus people who kind of throw ethics out the window in the pursuit of simply getting a short-term result. I'm curious, in working with a model that is specific for salespeople, how do you take that into account? And is this something that in the grander scheme of things, sales-focused machine learning models have a responsibility to be more ethical in order to serve the customer better? Sorry, it's a huge one.
No, I'm thinking through a whole bunch of things. So first of all, I think let me start from the top, because you mentioned something about whatever parrots it was. I forget what it was now. But on that topic, though, I think I know what the topic is about, though. I do think AI has actually progressed more than people think it is. So let me just quickly touch on that, right? So this is a very, very fascinating topic because everybody's interested in it. It's like, how good is this AI? On one extreme is that it's pretty stupid. It just regurgitates a bunch of content that it's given to it, right? And it's has a bunch of content from 2021. That's a bunch of sentences. And then it just strings a bunch of sentences. At the end of the day, that's all that the model is trained to do, which is we have a bunch of sentences. I'm going to try to repeat a bunch of sentences. That's it. That's what the model is trained to do. On the other hand, you have people like Elon Musk saying, wait a minute, this thing is going to take over the whole world and humans are going to go extinct, right? And it's not just Elon Musk. There are lots of people who think humans are going to become extinct because of AI. So it's a pretty big divide between the two. And so the first question is, where are we, right? And why is there such a big divide? So I would say, it's a little bit trickier because although it's just regurgitating sentences, the biggest, thing that's interesting here is, I'll give you one example, which is, if you think of grammar, for the longest time, we have tried to teach computers grammar, and we made very little progress. And you would think that Grammarly, the state-of-the-art grammar system, would actually have a lot of AI, and for the most part, it actually doesn't. The state-of-the-art grammar system, even today, looks at 4 words at a time, looks at the frequencies of the 4 words, and then tries to see if the 4 words that you have is less frequent than the most frequent set of 4 words that you can have together. And if so, then you have human raters actually write why that is the case. So it has no understanding, even the state-of-the-art grammatical system has no understanding of sentence structure. The reason I'm saying that is, if you look at anything that OpenAI produces as outputs, it's grammatically perfect now. It's very hard-pressed for it to make a grammatical mistake, which if you think about it, it has actually figured out what grammar is without it getting taught what grammar is. It's a higher level concept than stringing together words at a time. It has actually figured out what grammar is, right? And it's sound. It's perfect. I mean, it's grammatically better than probably any of us here. And we can now see that it can do algebra pretty well. You can give it any GRE question, it can do algebra. So it's figured out algebra without it knowing what algebra is or teaching it algebraic rules. And hence the problem, right? Which is, okay, it figured out what grammar is, it figured out what algebra is. So where does it stop? Can it figure out anatomy, physiology? Like, where does this thing stop? And hence sort of the fear. So that's a long answer to saying, okay, it's not just mimicking a bunch of human text for the paper that you were referring or the article that you were referring, but I think there is something more going on than that, which is what is freaking people out today. In terms of ethics itself, at the end of the day, I think whatever we build has to be useful for both the recipients and the sender, or the seller and the buyer. Otherwise, it's not going to be that useful. Otherwise, it's going to be always short-lived. So if you're not helping both the seller and the buyer, then I think it's not going to work. And everything else is going to be short-lived. And so I sort of believe a little bit in the capitalistic system there to sort of self-solve that problem. Because as an example, if you're just sending mass emails, very quickly there'll be another company on the recipient side to make sure it filters out all these emails, right? So I think it'll get fixed, is my 2 cents. And I think short term will be very, very short term. If you're trying to just spam people or do something very short term, it's not going to last.
Cool. All right, let's go to Kyle.
Hey, Sri. So I think first, clearly you're spot on. You're the expert, but training it in your voice and giving it as much information as possible is something that we found is super useful. I just wrapped up a 6-month gig where we were using GPT-4 mainly. So my question is, I'm not currently paying for GPT-4. As from a free perspective, would you choose GPT-3 or would you choose something like Bard or some of the other ones that are coming out now? As far as are they all kind of equal? Who's further along? Like I've played with Bard, but not as much as I've done on the OpenAI products. So what would you say is the way to go for a free? And then is GPT-4 worth paying for it?
Great question.
Great question. OpenAI is still ahead. And we are in the business of trying to make sure that, we use the best in class. So because our customers will have to, that reflects on our customers. So OpenAI is still ahead, but I do think, so Bard has made significant improvements from 6 months back or so. And Google is treating this very, very seriously. And so I personally think that the playing ground will get leveled, but at the moment, OpenAI is still ahead. And there are other players too. There's Cohere, there's Anthropic, there's a whole bunch of other players in there, and Facebook has models that's open source. And of course, you can't use it directly. It's a little bit of a pain to use it. But between the models that are available, OpenAI is still definitely ahead. But Bard's catching up though. Now, is it worth switching for the sake of it or paying for it? That's up to you.
Maybe can you just dive into, let me piggyback on Kyle's question. What's the big advantage of paying for it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one, so you get things like plugins that's not available on GPT, on the unpaid GPT-4. The other thing is, of course, I think if you don't pay for it, they can use the same data for training, which led to all the issues with privacy. And so they can use the data for training. And if you ask a question and give some internal company secrets as part of the question, they can technically use that data for somebody else's answer. So if Srinath said, hey, Microsoft and Tesla are Reggie's customers, what would be a third great customer? And then somebody else asks the question, who are Reggie's customers? It would say, hey, I know this answer because Srinath told me that Microsoft and Tesla are Reggie's customers. Yeah, so those are the sorts of things. I think there are rate limits as well on the free accounts. So you can't ask it too many things. So yeah, just random things.
We got another question from Ryan Walker.
Sri, thank you for this. This has been absolutely fascinating. And I consider myself to be a little bit of an early adopter of technology. So I've been playing around with this for quite some time. I am a paid user of GPT-4, and I think it's just as a curation tool. And I know Regie helps tremendously with this, to be able to pare down thoughts and organize your own content, your own writing, and be able to sort of distill it down in a way that is more digestible for the folks that are consuming that content, whether as a seller or as somebody who's just sharing. It's just the way my brain works. It's incredible. Like I just love this technology for a number of reasons. I understand sort of the questions around ethics. I did want to ask a little bit about your stance on sort of the competitive moat that OpenAI has built, but I think you sort of just touched on it. So if you're okay with it, kind of want to ask a left field question, which is, what was it like to be one of the first 100 engineers at Facebook? Because it looks like 2007, 2009. I can only imagine the meteoric rise that you were experiencing as a part of that organization. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear any fun stories about that.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy times. And it actually reminds me of the times that we are living in today, because at that time, Facebook was growing so fast that we couldn't buy enough servers to support the customers. It's just the same thing that's happening now. If you look at it, we are running out of GPUs worldwide because, Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and others and NVIDIA are just buying up all the GPUs. So there's like a worldwide shortage. That's how big this is. And same thing happened back when Facebook was growing. The biggest issue we had was we couldn't just buy up enough servers in the data centers. It was not a cost issue. It was not an issue of paying for the computers. We just couldn't put the computers in place fast enough for the speed at which it was growing the user base. So that was one crazy piece of story. I mean, there are lots of stories about early days of Facebook. For better or worse, for the most part, in the middle of the day at Facebook, there would be nobody at their desks because everybody was interviewing people. So for 9 to 5, if you actually looked into Facebook, it was actually empty. Because everybody was in conference rooms interviewing other people. So we were also scrambling to hire people. So that was also pretty crazy. But people were very down to earth. Zuckerberg was just on the same floor as everybody else. And he would go around Friday evenings asking people if they wanted to play video games. And it was just another guy. Yeah, I mean, it was also, I mean, some parts of the movie, if you've seen it, are true. Obviously, there are things like the walls and the graffiti on the walls, and those were all true. But some of the culture was also true, which is, it was like dorm culture. People had relationships in the office, and and that led to lots of drama. And it was definitely play hard, work hard culture. And people just living in the office, basically. It was pretty crazy.
Thank you for humoring me. I appreciate it.
Matt Sullivan, let's go to you, Matt.
Yeah, Sri, thanks for the conversation. I think the question I have is, at the outset, when you were talking about, OpenAI, Bard, what Microsoft's doing, kind of the all-encompassing AI, as opposed to, like your company and other specific niche players or targeting specific use cases. How, as a CEO, how do you see this playing out, say, a year from now? Because I personally don't think people are going to want to manage a bunch of different AI solutions on top of the applications that they're paying for and pay for different AI solutions. So how are you viewing that, and or what are you hearing from customers today around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And everybody's trying to figure out the same thing, to be completely transparent, right? Because when we started, this was not a question at all, right? In 2020, when we started, we didn't think that the application players were going to move into the space at all. It was a niche idea. It's something like a little crazy. Eventually, yes, it's like Google taking Facebook seriously. Eventually, we thought somebody would take us seriously, but we didn't think until ChatGPT came along, this was not a thing that anybody was focused on. Everything changed because of ChatGPT. It was just in the last 9 months, because until then, this was not a question at all. Now the question is exact same question applies everywhere. So look at search as an example, right? Web search. Is generative AI going to be a feature of web search, or is generative AI going to be its own thing? Like, not clear yet, right? And Google is worried that, that if it's its own thing, then it's going to take Google's market share away. And if it's a feature of web search and Google can just support it as part of Google, then it's great. Google stays, and then they take even more market and they're happy. So everybody's trying to figure this out. The early adopters here are betting that that is going to be a new generative AI stack in here. And so similar to how Outreach made, let's say, CRM, Salesforce, a system of record, the question is, can things like Regie live on top of Outreach, which lives on top of Salesforce, right? Is that going to be a separate stack? So same issue with Jasper. Let's say, is Jasper going to live on top of a HubSpot in the marketing automation platform side? That's the question. That's the bet. And only time will tell. And until then, the question is, do you want a competitive edge or not? And so that's sort of where we are today. And exact same thing is going to happen on consumer side as it is on the enterprise side. On one direction it could play out is to say that, hey, you don't need an outreach because Salesforce supports everything that you need. But it could also be the case that, well, you need an outreach because Salesforce is not moving fast enough to do sales engagement. So similarly, the question is whether Regie can live on top of outreach. I mean, that's our hope, but got to see what happens.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're all thinking about is how generative AI is working in sales, how it might shape or is shaping the role, the expectations, the skills of the SDR function. I have actually been talking a little bit recently about how I think that the SDR role is about to get killed off. Doesn't mean I'm right at all. So I'm curious how you see AI, affecting this role moving forward. What people's expectations should be of that role and skill, and what do you see happening with that role specifically?
Yeah, great question. Gartner actually wrote this. There is a YouTube video on Gartner doing generative AI for sales. I thought it was really, really good video. I can try to see if I can drop the link on chat. But high level is the following. I don't think calls are going to get disrupted anytime soon, just because of regulation reasons. You cannot do robocalls. So calls is out of the question anytime soon. Again, just because of regulations. Even if you think that computers could get really good at calls, which I don't think they will anytime soon, I think calls are here to stay. Inbound responses, I think, are here to stay. So there's lots of workflows that a SDR does, planning and so on. That's all. I think it's here to stay. So I think so. The way Gartner put it is that about 15% of SDR's work, maybe 25% of SDR's work, can be automated, and that's generally the work that they don't want to do anyway. And I think that's all likely going to get automated. But 75% or 85% of the work, for example, doing inbound responses, calls, and running demos, doing qualification, I think that's all here to stay. So I don't think the whole thing is going to go away anytime soon.
Not go away because of AI. I suppose it's a whole other conversation if it will go away because of other things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, what about an AE role or a VP of sales kind of role? Because there's a lot of, you could argue, there's a lot of things that sales leaders do that are maybe administrative in nature, strategic in nature, administrative in nature, that some of those activities could get automated away. If you're talking about 25% of activities for an SDR, what about for a sales leader, of which there's a bunch on this call, either past, present, or future?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic, which is, and I think this is a really interesting topic on the generative AI side itself. So right now, generative AI, for the most part, is just writing stuff, right? And all the most mature applications today are about writing stuff. And for the most part, it's just writing large pieces of text. That's it. That's the most mature today. The parts that's freaking people out a little bit is that it can write code, which we know it can write pretty good code. And now it can actually run that piece of code that it can write, And so that's freaking people out a little bit, because the combination of the two is that it can actually do stuff, which it couldn't do before. It could only write the email. If you could write that email and send that email or something, then it's a lot more, it's doing stuff, and then you sort of lose control a little bit. And so coming to the administrative side, I think what is interesting, exciting, and for lots of people scary is this transition. There's all this agent GPT, as people call it. If you haven't Googled it, you can look through it. I have my own perspective of whether it's going to be agents or not. But there is going to be some abstraction, I strongly believe, that's going to be more than just writing stuff. And that is interesting, exciting, and a little scary. And in sales, that will get into some of the RevOps side of things, as an example. So for example, can I find leads? Can I automatically segment the personas? Can I use intent data automatically? Can I prioritize the accounts I need to reach out? And then, of course, write the email. And then can I send that email with interacting with outreach? Can I interact with Salesforce? Can I interact with 6 Sense? Now it sort of starts getting a little interesting, because it's not just writing stuff, but it's actually doing stuff.
It's actually doing something, yeah, right.
And I do think that it's coming, and not just in sales. I think it's coming everywhere.
Yeah,
it's just not writing a blog. It's writing a blog, putting the blog up, and then it's looking at the search traffic you're getting, and then it's changing the blog based on the search traffic. And then a competitor wrote something, and then it, started losing.
I like how the cadence of your speech accelerated with the acceleration of what's happening with that blog right there.
Exactly, right? So
it's very symbolic of how fast things are going to move. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, so Sri, I have I guess like the philosophical angle of this, and so I installed Python on my laptop for the first time, so I could test out at least running some of this baby AGI or
Yep.
Agent GPT stuff, just because it's fascinating to me. I think in the wrong hands or without the right boundaries, it gets really messy, but it seems to me relatively inevitable that there's going to be a ton of operational efficiency in business
Yep.
that is realized as a result of some of this stuff. And I think that's amazing. My question, I guess, is more around philosophically, if we're finding more operational efficiency within an organization, what does that mean in a culture like, the startup cultures in North America, at least, where like we're always looking to do more and more and more, find better uses for our time? Like, what does that do for the folks that can realize some of that operational efficiency and then potentially have more time on their hands to do other things? Like I'm trying to figure out, and obviously we're not going to know until we know how much this impacts, the idea of work-life balance or work-life integration, where people have more time on their hands or more time to critically think about real issues and systemic problems that are challenging the business, and that frees up more opportunity for the organization. Like, I'm just trying to think of if we're able to realize that operational efficiency play, what do you think that does for startups in terms of the way that they manage employees, or how somebody in a high growth tech startup might approach their role differently?
Yeah, I mean, as always the case, we've always tried to figure out new things to do, right? We've had so many pieces of automation before, and we still do 5-day work weeks, and we still manage to fill up our calendars. So I'm pretty optimistic, for better or worse, that we'll end up still filling up our calendars and doing a lot of work. So it's just keeps moving in higher and higher abstractions, right? So, and I think the same thing will happen here. So I don't think people will sort of work less, retire, or move to 4-day weeks or 3-day weeks and so on. And we'll start thinking about philosophy while computers do their work. I think we just move into higher levels of abstraction and to higher level of tasks. And I do think right now it's a lot of AI on at least on the business side, from the enterprise side, from the sender side, if you will, from the seller side. I think we'll have a lot of AI on the buyer side soon too. And then I think it's going to be humans talking to AI, talking to AI, talking to humans. All right. And so that's inevitable, I think.
Wow.
Spam is a good example of it, right? AI doing spam is a good example of it. Because it's humans sending automated emails through outreach, getting automatically classified through spam, getting back to humans. But I think that's going to just get streamlined more and more.
So what happens when the buyer becomes jaded and is just like, this is a robot talking to me, not a person? Mm-hmm. Will backlash come where it'll suddenly be a badge of honor to actually not use AI and be like, you're actually talking to a human being right here. This is a huge advantage. It's no longer an advantage to be using AI. Can you see that happening in terms of the buyer experience?
I think it's possible, but I do think it has to be useful for both buyers and sellers, right? So otherwise, I don't think anything is useful. So there is always something where you're telling the buyer that you're investing in them, whether that's sending them a gift or sending them doing a Zoom call. If you're investing in them, I think that's obviously better. At the same time, from a buyer standpoint, let's say that I'm actually looking for a product in the space. I really welcome somebody reaching out to me. I'll give you a great example of this. So Regie uses. Is there anybody from Drata or Vanta here? Let me anonymize who we use. That way, I don't piss off anybody. So Drata and Vanta are SOC 2 vendors, and we use one of them. And given the economy and so on, when it comes time to renew, I obviously reach out to the other vendor and say, like, hey, this is the deal that we have with one of them. can you give me a better deal on the other side? Now, the funny thing is, I asked them the exact same question last year, right? So I would have welcomed an email from the AE from last year sending me an email saying, hey, we spoke last year. We couldn't do better than this pricing. A lot has changed. Here is the new pricing that we offer. Before you renew these guys, can you actually do a call with us? That's a welcome email, right? So I think, and that's good for a buyer and seller. So I think it has to be something that's useful. But I think more like, for example, immediately I would say above the line accounts, ABM accounts, humans are best. Nurture is going to be probably the first one that gets automated, where there's lots of people to actually reach out to a lot of them.
I mean, let's be honest, nobody likes to nurture accounts.
Exactly.
I mean, am I projecting? Maybe. I don't know. Nobody likes to nurture accounts, I don't think. Anthony, let's go to you.
Hey, that was kind of my question, not in the exact sense, but pretty similar. There's already a lot of noise, right? We're getting noise from everywhere. I'm getting people asking me for companies that I haven't worked for in 5 years, LinkedIn 3 times a day. How do you think people are going to be able to cut through that noise if it's so simple to have an outreach for anyone, really? And you're just now going to get inundated, and it started with spam email, and now it's getting spam everywhere, text messages, so on and so forth. And it's just going to get easier and easier to do that. And then with your human to computer to human, our ability to communicate is declining rapidly in our youth, right? So now you're not even going to be able to come up with your own thoughts. So that's concerning to me, because we're even implementing something that is going to stunt that growth further. So kind of 2 separate questions.
Yeah, I mean, the second question I think is a little bit philosophical, and it's actually very interesting to me personally, because like probably lots of us here, I grew up pre-internet, right? When I went to high school, or at least middle school, that was pre-internet, I couldn't just ask a question and find an answer. We had encyclopedias and then these tell me whys, and I had to like look through one of these to hope that somebody had the question that I had, and then
PTSD. You're giving me PTSD right now.
Right, and you had all these books from A through Z, and then AA through AZ or ZZ or whatever, and then you had to hope that you could find it. But you would think that people will be much smarter now with the internet, but it's not really that clear, right? Like, I don't know, like if you speak to somebody who's in their 40s and 50s and who's a decent person, it somehow seems the same as in their 20s, and it's not like that helped or hurt somehow. We just morphed into something else. And so I don't know what will happen with this automation. If the same analogy, should we be much smarter now or much dumber now because we can't store things in memory? Like, we don't remember phone numbers. My mom used to remember all the phone numbers in her head, right? I barely know 2 phone numbers now. Is that worse? Is that better? I don't know. We somehow just morphed and we just worked around it, right? And so I think...
Well, it's worse if you lose your phone and need to call somebody pretty quick.
That's why I need to know at least 2 phone numbers or I get arrested or something. Which is a long way from being able to recall hundreds of phone numbers. But we just worked around it. So I don't know. So philosophically, it feels like I think we can get.
I think everybody who's in their 40s or 50s can remember at least a couple numbers still from their youth. I know I can.
Yeah.
But I could not tell you. This is really embarrassing. I literally could not tell you my kids' phone numbers. I couldn't do it. Can't do it. Bad father. Go ahead. Judge me, Jacqueline. I see your mouth agape. I don't know my kid's phone number. I know the area code. That's about it.
You better learn it before you drag them to the UK.
WhatsApp group solves all that. I just send a message to like 500 people all at once. Caleb. All right.
I forgot what the first part of the question was, but hopefully anyway.
That's
So
all right.
I feel more optimistic about it. Look, I at the end of the day, I don't think personally I'm sold on the Elon Musk's view of the world, whereby this is going to take over a lot of stuff. I do think it'll help do a lot of the repetitive stuff. I do think the perfect memory aspect of AI is pretty huge. It doesn't forget anything, right? So I think that's very valuable because it can look through all of Salesforce to know all of the and all the prior history. All of that is extremely useful, but I am more skeptical on it coming up with company strategies and planning and doing a lot of the work. So we will see some natural places where it'll stop being as useful, and humans will still be on top of those things. But it might make a lot of.
I guess that begs the question of what's the next frontier or the next milestone that we might encounter. If you're saying there's like a cap of sorts where humans still be needed, like then what's the next frontier, the next big breakthrough?
Well, the immediate breakthrough is going to be the execution layer, and that's coming. And so I think that's going to be very exciting, scary, but I do think that is coming, and in all the fields. But I still think there will be some limitations to it. I don't think it's going. I think the repetitive stuff it'll do well, and the continuous optimization where it can be on top of it, like nurturing people, I think it'll be pretty good at. Obviously, the multimodal stuff, images and videos, that's all coming simultaneously. I think the big questions are still like speech synthesis and whether it can hold a conversation on the phone and so on. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And I don't know how easy it is going to be. It might be 5 years from now. It might be 50 years from now. The concept of this general AI, I still think is ways out. I know lots of people are freaking out on it taking over and making humans extinct. I don't think it'll get. The beautiful thing that I wake up every day in knowing is that, hey, we're looking at prospecting as one workflow, right? And we'll keep pushing AI, right? And so if we see the limitations, we'll be among the first to see the limitations in our little microcosm. And the same limitations we hit, everybody else will hit in their own domains. And so I don't think it'll be. It's going to be a lot of automation. It's going to be a lot of perfect memory, which is what computers are good at. But I don't think it'll be very general intelligence sort of stuff. And that general AI development, it's anybody's guess how long it's going to be. OpenAI is focused on doing it now, but it's all R&D. So it could be 5 years, it could be 50 years. Nobody knows.
How would somebody, here's the question, as everybody here, other than you, I think is not building one of these tools, which means everybody's a potential user or a potential buyer. How is somebody supposed to sift through the noise of everybody who's building stuff in this space to figure out which one is best for me and why? How do I know which tools to use when everything just has AI next to it, right? I mean, one could argue that there's at least 5 companies I can think of that do almost what you do. And I think one of the things people struggle with is differentiating between them right now.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I wonder how you think about, as you build your business, like how do I make my AI tool different than other people's AI tools?
Yep. Great question. Just like everything else, I think there'll be a natural set of leaders, right? Like if you look at CMS, Seismic, HighSpot, maybe Showpad. If you look at sales engagement, there's Outreach, Salesloft, and then maybe Apollo, and then there's a whole tail of companies. A CRM, same thing. Salesforce, HubSpot, then there's a whole tail of things. I think there'll be a natural evolution of this thing. And until the evolution plays out, you're going to have competition. But I think that will be a natural evolution of these things. And for now, I would say POVs, proof of concepts, demos. There's lots of demoware right now, to be completely honest, because people want marketing buzz right now. Especially, I think the platform players, this is true, because the platform players, they have their own roadmaps, and they're like, wait a minute, I can get some buzz out of this thing. Let me just create a video. And even this includes even public companies, and then maybe our stock price will go up. And so don't trust the demowares. Don't trust the marketing videos. Do a proof of concept. See if you like it. See if you find partners you can work with for the long run. If it's a space you're interested in investing, just make sure that you can work with partners in the long run. And then there, over time, over the next 2 to 3 years, I think there'll be a natural sort of gradation of the players here, and then we'll see who the winners are and who the top few people are. One quick question that I wanted to address. I think somebody asked, okay, what are good jobs if AI is coming for my jobs, or some Connor has this question. So a quick point is, I actually think sales is one of the better jobs to have, to be completely honest. And the reason is, I think people talking to people is not going to go away. I would be more worried about jobs that do not have interactions with people. Like driving is a good example. I think at some point driving is going to happen. It's taken us much longer than we anticipated, but when it happens, right? And it's over. And, software engineering is going to have a tremendous impact on this thing, because you don't talk to people that much. It's some specs and you do some things. So I think off the lot, I would be happier being in sales than in other jobs, because talking to people is still going to be good.
That's interesting, and hopefully comforting for everybody on this call who's maybe worried about that stuff a little bit. Any last questions for Sri from anybody in the audience?
I do, Sri, just think it's a little bit ironic that I have a lot of friends that are actually wearing a t-shirt right now that own or work in software development consultancies, and it's funny that those folks are the ones that are probably most self-aware of the fact that this technology is putting a lot of pressure on their profession. So I think it's one of the reasons why there's a lot of focused attention on building in this space, because they understand the power of it. But yeah, it's probably for another conversation. But Sri, just thank you so much for this. This was really, really awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Any closing thoughts for us, Sri, before we wrap up?
No, I would actually say, coming back full circle, we probably didn't talk about embracing AI and being worried about it. But, I think the last point is probably most relevant, which is, look, at the end of the day, I would still say sales is probably the better of the lot in terms of automating jobs. And I would say, I think if it can drive efficiency, that's great. Everybody has to embrace it. It's just going to happen. There's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. I think it's gone. So might as well stay ahead. But I would say, in terms of being confident, I would say sales is probably much better off than even software engineering. So I think it'll be good.
All right. Well, we appreciate you spending some time with us. Thanks everybody for coming to Tequila Tuesday, brought to you by GTM United. And by the way, make sure you check out the GTM Assist channel, because Regie AI has a number of accounts in there that they're looking for help breaking into, with some introductions and creating some opportunities. So we'll see you all next time. Thanks again.
Thanks all. Bye.